Okay, and we are back with the Home Plate Podcast brought to you by Fog Coast Productions and our special guest of the day. Honored to introduce this man, San Francisco Giants general manager from 1997 to 2014, three times World Series champion in 2010, 2012, and 2014, executive of the year in 2003. Our friend, Brian Sabean. Brian, how you doing tonight? Thanks for joining us.
Good, guys. All
Man,
set.
what an honor to have you on the show. What a time for Major League Baseball coming out of the pandemic. 2021 season is in full swing. How do you like the boys at Third and King? How do you like the San Francisco Giants? I mean, have you been impressed with what they've been able to do so far this year?
Oh, without a doubt. It seems to be one of those divisions, at least early on, that could be for the taking. Although we all know the Dodgers will right the ship. A little bit confounded as to where San Diego's at, but when you pitch like we're pitching and played the defense we've played, you're going to be in a lot of games. And I think we had 4 hits today and ended up winning the game, and that's kind of been the tail of our season. Almost like the blueprint that won 3 World Series: pitching, defense, timely hitting. This team has more power. The starting pitching's been incredible. And the bullpen, while it's a work in progress, you got a legit closer with McGee, so good things are going to happen.
Yeah, we're excited. I mean, I can speak on behalf of the surrounding neighborhood and restaurants and retail down in that part of San Francisco. It's nice to have some baseball back. It's nice to have winning baseball back. Your son, Sean, obviously a member of this podcast and a good friend of ours. Shawnee, I mean, Giants baseball is, when they're playing well, is there much better as you look back through the history of San Francisco?
It's always good when the boys are winning, right, guys? And, like my father is saying, I think I've been incredibly impressed with what the team has accomplished. I agree with my pops that the power that this team has is far exceeds the teams of the past, at least the winning teams from 2010, 12, and 14. And you got guys like Gaussman, who's absolutely shoving, DeSclafani, Alex Wood. All these guys are pitching great. And, Jake McGee has been solid in the bullpen. And listen, if you can win this division, that's impressive in itself, going up against the Padres and the Dodgers. So hopefully we're in the thick of things down the road here, but you got to be impressed with where they're at right now, and hopefully it continues.
Brian, you touched on the division a little bit, and of course we've got a million things to go over with you, and we don't want to strap you for time. So we'll stay in the present here for a couple more minutes before we look back and go full nostalgia on you. The division with the Dodgers, like you said, they're going to right the ship. The Padres, just putting one all-star after another from whether they're batting leadoff or they're pitching. Do you see the Giants sustaining the success? I mean, other than Arizona and Colorado, it seems like it's going to be Dodgers, Padres, Giants for most of the season, as long as everybody stays healthy and we keep hitting.
I would tend to agree. Arizona could be a spoiler. Colorado is going to be challenged. The one thing we got to remember, though, there's going to be some weird things happen for quite a while now. And when I say that, it wasn't a traditional spring training. A lot of clubs, including us, slow played things, including with their position players. The biggest question is, how is everybody's pitching going to hold up? And I think one way or the other, you don't want to get too high or too low on your favorite team, including the Giants, maybe August 1st. And having said that, I think that it's a shotgun start of the season. The one thing I do know with a good start is that you may not be able to, win a pennant, get to the playoffs, let's say, by having good Aprils and May. But beats the alternative. You get off to a bad start or a tough start, it's tough to overcome that, and you can lose your season. So we're definitely pointed in the right direction. We're playing like hell at home. We're going to gain confidence. Now, the sobering thing is you're going to go on the road most of the month, the remainder of the month, and we're going to play a legit schedule. So you've got to beat these people that are 500 above outside the division. And, I think we're capable of doing better than we have on the road. but we're going to see. It's going to be literally a week-to-week proposition for a lot of teams.
Exciting. I mean, week to week for me, over 162 games, I can't get enough of that. I as a fan, I want there to be the grinded out games. Of course, I want the Giants to win. I want them to win, but I want it to be exciting. I think fans are looking forward to seeing some runs being scored. The pitching's been phenomenal. How do you compare this team to, let's say, to starts of years past, whether it's been a great season, World Series years, or maybe the team had fallen off and trailed off the second half of the season after the All-Star break? Do you feel something special with this team, or is it just too early to tell?
I think every roster and team's unto its own. I think Farhan and the front office have been very agile as to what they've tried to do with one-year deals. We're very platoon-centric as far as the lineup. We're forever trying to match up the right relievers once the starter comes out. But when you're getting this kind of performance from start to start from each pitcher, we've got Cueto back in the rotation, and he'll be better than his last start the next time around. You're going to have to pitch, and in doing so, with a bullpen and a closer, you win the games you're supposed to win. So we're going to find out. I can't compare it. The only thing close, perhaps, is that 97 was kind of a year that not only was needed, but somewhat came out of nowhere. Now, when you come as close to the playoffs as we did last year, and most of those guys are back, and you added to the team, that helps the energy and the I guess the clubhouse in general. These guys pay attention. They want the front office to be in it, for the right reasons, and as passionate as they are about winning. So it's a good vibe. While I'm certainly not there, and I'm viewing this from afar. It's a very competitive team that can win in a lot of ways.
Man, fellas, please jump in and piggyback off of that. Sarge, I know you've got a couple questions you want to fire off.
There's a lot to pick from. Brian, I was just trying to start, from starting with the Giants. I know you almost went with the Reds one day, but super curious to start. I won't say your favorite trade, but the best acquisition that you made in your tenure at the Giants. I'm curious who that is.
I really don't rate trades as much as the timing therein. And when I took over at the end of the 96 season, we had a meeting of the minds, and we were really in a buy-in to try to go from, second division team to challenging, to win a division. And we found out that our payroll just didn't work. As crazy as this sounds, between Bonds and Williams against the $30 million payroll, they were making half. So the decision was made that one of them had to go. And, with a series of meetings, for the right reasons, we decided that Barry was the franchise player, and Matt might be the most tradable or, quote, expendable. So the 97 trade, the timing of it, and by virtue of really getting Kent back, although there were more people in that trade, and, seeing that this guy's a potential Hall of Famer, and really made a huge difference, not only in the performance of Bonds, but was a cornerstone like Bonds with that team offensively. And then the second one during that year, which was timely because we were running out of gas with the pitching, was the White Sox trade. And it was unheard of, where we got two starters in Alvarez, a number 3 starter, and Danny Dower, a number 5 starter, as well as their closer, Hernandez, who became the closer at the end of the 97 season. So timing was huge. The pressure was on. And, there was a lot of consternation for the right reasons. But by the fan base, and it was probably a confusing time because internally we decided to try to go for it and not have a lengthy, protracted rebuild. And quite frankly, teams back then, unless you were a bottom feeder or traditionally, second division team, that wasn't the sign of the times. You didn't do that to your fan base.
Well, I am not an idiot is the quote that I will always remember. I know you're going there, Tito, but I know Sean has that in his room right now. It's classic.
I mean, it was an all-time quote then. It has lived in infamy since then. And Brian, I mean, to your point, going from kind of second division to trying to be a contender. I mean, not many years before that, this team was supposed to become the Florida Marlins, right? And so here you are, taking Matt Williams, shopping him for, Jeff Kent, obviously, who ends up, becoming an MVP, future Hall of Famer. When you think back to the media, really coming after you and the decision of the organization to shop and get rid of someone like Matt Williams, do you try to one up the media, moving forward, or is the quote, "I'm not an idiot"? Do you set it and forget it and just move on?
It was a very vulnerable time, not only for the organization but myself. People didn't know that I was a known commodity in two organizations: scouting, player development, player personnel. To the point where I was a vice president in both organizations, and running things, really at the top in terms of, the draft, the minor league system, Latin America, et cetera. And I wasn't known to the press or the fan base because I virtually was on the road, as Sean can attest, year round. So really where the quote came from is that I don't know that I was trying to explain away or give, a rational answer to, how this was mapped out, as much as, I had to make a stand that, hey, I've been around the block, including and a lot more pressure in the positions that I had, even though, I didn't become the general manager in New York, and that, I wasn't an idiot. There was a way forward with this. Now, I'm not telling stories out of school as much as what happened was, in fairness to Peter McGowan and even Larry Baird, they weren't used to having to deal with the fan base of the press on this bigger issue. And quite frankly, Dusty, was flabbergasted because he was losing one of his best players. So I was in the middle of a firestorm to the point where I get death threats, on the voicemail at home and in the office. And Bob Rose, our PR, vice president of PR, really did a good job of kind of soothing things on a one-on-one basis to get, myself more out front and more media friendly, and more so them to get to know me. But it was a firestorm. And looking back, rightfully so. I say it jokingly, but, Barry was the uber talent and the prickly personality, and Matt was the organizational favorite and, the favorite son, as well as the Easter Bunny. So when, it's like shooting the Easter Bunny on Easter, that's basically what I did. And it was a, gutsy thing for the organization to allow us to do, but there was no way we could have gone forward and had a competitive team with those guys pulling down half the payroll. That's unheard of in baseball. You can't field a team.
And I mean, it obviously paid dividends, moving forward. Just 4 years later, reinvesting in Barry Bonds. There's a World Series appearance, against the Angels, which none of us really want to rehash and go over. Brian, you touched on it, being on the road and traveling so much. I've had the good fortune of spending a couple of good, sit down times just talking with you. And it seems like scouting for you is really where the love of the game, is that's kind of the catalyst and the nucleus for everything else. And being out and being in the Dominican Republic and watching young players grow and scouting and seeing those people, do you have a favorite scouted player that you can recall that either blossomed and became a big time, big show guy, or just somebody that you enjoyed getting to know when he was younger, growing up, playing? It just is something I've always been wondering.
Lord knows, you can imagine how many, free agents being eligible for the amateur draft that I've seen.
Right.
There's some come to mind. I saw Sheffield firsthand coming out of Tampa. He was a Tampa product, Hillsborough High School shortstop back then. Incredible tools as well as talent. And, look at the bio. He got to the big leagues in a hurry. Griffey, very similar, to the point he was bored. One of the games I saw him, in between innings, he actually sat in the stands with the co-eds and waited for his at-bats. And if they didn't come, he just ran from the stands out to the outfield and got in this position. But man-child, got to the big leagues overnight, Hall of Famer. Jeter, as crazy as it sounds, was a work in progress, although the area scout was completely enamored with him for the right reasons and really thought he was going to have a special career. And in fact, in one of the reports, he wrote that he had, in his mind, he could be a Hall of Famer. This kid was one of the best athletes in the country. And his, hand to eye, his ability to play a premium position as well as the bat to ball skills, were off the chart. A-Rod, another high school kid that got to the big leagues fast. It was just a man-child and, grew up in the hotbed of Miami. Maybe the best pitcher I ever saw, and I'm not exaggerating, Brian Taylor, when I was with the Yankees, we took him number one. We had the misfortune of having the number one pick. You never want the number one pick. And Brian, in high school, had Chapman stuff as a starter.
Wow.
And this is back when, starters didn't, have 4 above average pitches at that age. He got to Double-A at a very young age and, would average deep into games 98 miles an hour with his fastball. And unfortunately for him, he got in a fight protecting his younger brother and got banged up pretty good and destroyed his left shoulder, which pretty much was the end of his career. But those guys come to mind, and it's interesting that they all were younger or high school, products, so to speak. But and they were easy to scout, believe me. You guys would have had the same opinions, and our girlfriends and wives would have had the same opinions.
What about Mo, Brian? Mariano Rivera. I'm sure you scouted him. He wasn't a shortstop?
I never saw him live. He's an incredible story in that we had the fortune that our Latin American director, Herb Rayburn, was from Panama. And Herb was very networked. Now, you can also look this up. I want to say we signed Mariano at 19 or 20. And the reason for that is that he was from a small fishing village outside of Panama City. And he fished with his father and I think brothers. He might have been even part-time doing mechanical work or working as a mechanic. Actually might have been playing more soccer than baseball. And fortune would have it, he went to a tryout camp. I don't know if he actually was playing organized baseball. And Herb had the fortune to see him. And, he had that wiry strength with a loose arm. And the crazy thing is that, when he came to us in the minor leagues, he wasn't necessarily pegged as a phenom to be. He was going to be a work in progress. And the irony with the cutter or his, go-to pitch is that the action on his fastball really had cut action, which almost no right-handed pitcher exhibits or has the ability to make that happen naturally. And the irony was, maybe the best thing we did for him is he injured his arm and had to have Tommy John. And while he was on the sidelines, we decided to put him on the major league roster to protect him from being drafted. If we didn't, to another team, and they could have kept him at the big leagues, and in fact rehabbed him at the big leagues. And the irony, and the reason I'm telling the story, is that when he came back into the fold as to being, able to get back on the mound to pitch, whatever happened during that rehab, it really enhanced his ability to get the feel for the cutter to make it a legitimate pitch off his fastball. Because if you watch video of him, his fastballs weren't thrown straight. And even though they were up a velocity too, they had cut action. But I think just from the natural way he released the ball, the cutter was a natural.
A unanimous MVP, first time ever. It's crazy. Or a Hall of Famer, excuse me. That's wild.
When you think back to your time with the Giants, as general manager, obviously 2010, 2012, 2014, those come to mind as, obviously some of the best memories, best times for any Giants fan, of course. I mean, it was beautiful. But what I really wanted to pick your brain on was, the old expression of, through failure comes sort of life's greatest successes. And there was a period of time there between 2005, 2008, where, the Giants and winning, it was hard for those two things to come together in the same sentence. How internally did you guys continue to motivate yourselves and continue to make adjustments to then at the end of 2008, you get to 2009, Lincecum's a Cy Young in 2008, Cy Young again in 2009, and then boom, in 2010, we're rolling. What are you guys talking about internally to just keep things moving forward?
Well, the irony is we saw it coming. Two things happened. We really couldn't come up with a tangible, legitimate, I don't know how you want to phrase it, exit strategy for Barry. And I don't want to get into that as much as, he was on the team for the right reasons, but by having him on the team, including what we were paying him, it did handicap what you could do with the Major League Ball Club. Now, at the time, we also were in transition as to what was going on in our minor leagues. So we really needed that time, which ended up being 4 losing seasons, to let the minor leagues catch up. And you just hit the nail on the head. That wave of pitching came, and we were a pitching-centric organization to begin with. And, it reared its head in 2009. I think we might have finished 3 games out of the wild card, and it was a nice team that you could tell good things that would happen the next year. But that was a difficult time. I really appreciated ownership's patience. Looking back, I don't know if there was any way around but just gutting it out and going through what we did. But fortunately, we had a great development system. Dick Tidrow, much like I had done in the 2 organizations, including with the Giants, he was running player development and scouting, and he was our pitching savant, including in the draft and developing them in the minor leagues. And we had the right people in place to make this happen in time, but it was going to take some time.
I'll hop in here. So in regards to obviously the scouting background, Dad, something I was very fortunate enough to be a part of really my whole life was some of the characters and individuals that you surrounded yourself with. The San Francisco Giants were fortunate enough to have. You're talking Joe DiCarlo, Pat Dobson, Teddy Uhlander, Lee Elder, to say a few. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it was a common theme, not only for the entire organizations, but specifically for the scouting and baseball operations department, that there was this brotherhood and cohesion amongst that group. And then that ultimately kind of trickled down into those successful teams, whether it was the 2010 team, 12, 2014, where not only were these guys performing on the field, but these guys were really brothers off the field. They did everything together. So maybe can you touch on that as far as an evaluation process when evaluating a guy and deciding to bring him on, whether it's a free agent, a waiver signing, or a trade? Obviously you have to take in the statistics and the performance, but where in the process does that, is this guy just a good locker room fit for our team? Where does that come in during that due diligence?
Well, it's an interesting question because I do believe maybe in every sport, it starts and stops with scouting or what your system is. We were very fortunate that we had a veteran staff. We were very fortunate that with a veteran staff, and I'm not exaggerating this point, and I won't beleaguer it, but if you do this long enough, you develop a comparative analysis that really is incredible to the point where your brain is almost computerized. So whether it's seeing Sean Sabean as an amateur or in the minor leagues, let's say with another club, because of my experience in the field, including, as you pointed out, other than his talent, what his intangibles are and what's going on in the locker room with him, what kind of professional is that I can instantly, almost physically and talent-wise, compare you tangibly either to somebody that's in the organization presently or somebody else that's been in the big leagues. Now, of course, that runs the gambit. Are you an average player? Are you a platoon player? Are you going to be a regular? Do you have a chance to be an all-star? And the one thing I'll say, because I don't think enough organizations get enough credit for this. And I think when I say it, you'll see where I'm going without making a point or hammering home a point. Everybody's looking for, let's say, misfit toys or the advantage in, where they may be margins of areas to exploit. So with a veteran staff, you have the opportunity to pass on that scouting report information and what goes on in meetings to, at the time we all had statistical analysis. At the time we all had, services that we belonged to be able to break down a player's year, career, and try to predict what might take place in the future. But I don't think the profession gets enough credit or really is understood as much as the new age, the new wave is very, computer-centric, analytical, quantitative analysis, however you want to frame it. And in some cases, it's user-friendly to them more so than it is to kind of how you gain the right answer from all these experienced scouts. But you got to ask the right questions, and you got to know their tendencies, and you got to know their personalities. And now it goes back to what you said. I don't think we could have accomplished over time what we did in San Francisco. And basically the same model was in New York, where we pretty much signed and developed most of those guys that won the World Series for those guys, other than who was added from the outside. If you didn't have mutual respect, if you didn't have an ability to hang with each other and grind it out. There's a beauty in the grind, but it's not for everybody. And it's very competitive, and you want people that are passionate about their feelings. And we used to argue a lot, and to the point of it being very contentious or almost uncomfortable. But that's another thing. I grew up in the game in an era where you were around a lot of strong personalities. And for you to cut your teeth or get to the next level, you had to hold your own. At first it's It's the look, the listen, think, speak, and then as you gain, your area of expertise or, the toolbox that you're going to use in whatever job you're in. But it happens over time. And I learned from my elders. I was mentored by a lot of people, including in the front office of New York. And it's been interesting to see what teams have stayed the course with, equal part old school scouting and still having, a legitimate functioning scouting staff at all levels. So interesting question.
And to piggyback on that topic, is something that we've touched on, obviously, with the evolution of the game and more analysis, I guess, or sabermetrics involved. Something that I got to witness firsthand and being lucky enough to be a part of some of those draft rooms and doing internships in the summer with the baseball operations department. There was always this narrative that was trying to pit, I guess the Moneyball era versus the Giants, as if the Giants were this anti-analytical team. And I could say firsthand, I saw that we were not. We were an organization that adopted a lot of these new technologies first. The thing with our team, and as you know, Dad, we were just a little more tight-lipped about it. We didn't
talk about it. We didn't write a book. We didn't make a movie. But we went to 4 World Series. That's the report card. The way we did it, 4 World Series and 1 3. So
exactly. And
did they pay you royalties for the Savy Saves in Moneyball?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Not once did he ever call me that, nor do I remember the so-called Ethan movie, which I haven't seen.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Brian, I have a question for state of the game. We're talking about scouting here briefly. The shift, the runner at second base, the 3 batter, minimum rule, with the 6 closers that we had, with Javi Lopez, my favorite. I love Tyler Rogers, love the 7 Mariners. Will that change your scouting now? Does that? How guys are just striking out and they're just 5 no-hitters in 1 month now? I mean, what's going on?
Well, I think we're striking out, lineups are striking out at a record pace to this point. Mm-hmm. We've already had 4 no-hitters, I guess.
Yeah.
Crazy. Is that right?
You don't count Bumgarner's 7 innings that, they're playing right. 7 innings like in Little League now, which I don't get, but.
The new age, and let me just put it that way, and things evolve and change in a lot of respects in any walk of life, whether it's the business world, your personal life, et cetera. It happens over time. It happens for a reason. I think the litmus test is going to be when the fans are back in the park full time, and if this is something they want to continue to watch. Because while analytics perhaps has made the game, let's say, more efficient, or you found different ways to win, is it watchable? And I think the beauty and balance is, and let me ask you this question, everybody on the call. Let's say with the exception of the Dodgers, because they were all, from day one, whether that was 60 games or was going to be a 162 game season, was the deepest, most talented team. And they could beat you in any way. So my point is, they could beat you with the power pitching, and hold your offense down. They could beat you with the home run, but they also could play baseball. They could manufacture runs. They could run the bases. They could play defense. One of the reasons we won 3 World Series is we could play baseball. And in the playoffs, we ran up against teams that couldn't play baseball. And what I mean by that is that our team, under pressure, over time, learned how to win the 1-run game, learned how to not make mistakes, learn how to do the right things in handling in the bullpen, and nobody was better than our staff, or especially our manager, in doing so. And you find when you get into, the thick of it, especially late into the playoffs, if you can't play baseball, you're going to have a hard time getting to the finish line or raising that trophy. And, has a really all-out analytic-centric team won a World Series yet?
Eugenio Suarez playing shortstop.
I laugh to myself because, what I'm proud of, it took a 60. Now, I've been with the organization since 93, and the Dodgers hadn't won since 88. It took a 60-game season for them to win the World Series, which, oh, by the way, to me, that should be an asterisk. So I take great pride in that. But they're an incredible organization, again, from scouting and player development, as we talked about earlier, that gets that pipeline going to the big leagues.
When you touched on, the manager playing a huge part in manufacturing wins, helping the team navigate their way to one-run victories, playing tough when it matters, really just playing with that grit that we, each team was different, 2010, 2012, 2014, but it's undeniable that those guys were all tough and were just grinders. Just touch on your relationship with Bruce Bochy, again, Hall of Fame manager, absolutely amazing. Couldn't have done it without him. But I think the two of you, really interesting tandem, just knowing that the two of you are close personally and really have kind of the same ethos and love for baseball. What was it like working with him through that time of success?
Well, it became almost brotherly. Now, I will say this as a disclaimer, that I really didn't know Boch on a personal level when he was in San Diego. And as crazy as this sounds, I was trying to build a list, and Boch was under contract. And I had read something where Sandy Alderson, who had taken over as the team president, had pretty much told Kevin Towers that, Bochy was making a lot of money, and that might not be the direct direction of, what he wanted from a manager, including there probably wouldn't be an extension involved. And as fate would have it, I had to call Kevin for another reason. And when I did, he says, you're not going to believe this, but I think Boch might get permission to talk to other clubs. And he told me the story. He says, I think he's pretty well been told by Sandy that, it is what it is here. So lo and behold, we had permission. We flew him up, and he knew Pat Dobson very well, who was a special assistant to me. Pat lived in San Diego, was our advanced scout and one of our key guys in player personnel. And Boch had a personal relationship with him. So make a long story short, what I didn't know is that Boch kind of had an eye on, the what if with San Francisco. And fortunately for me, in the pursuit of him thereafter, is that, his contract was, done right and pretty hefty. And, Peter McGowan and the powers that be in the ownership group really allowed us to take that contract on. And then it for some reason, as soon as, he was on board, things clicked. Now, the first 2 years were a tough proposition because, as you know, that was, kind of Barry's swan song. And he really had held tough. I had his back, which he appreciated. I kind of insulated him from the media and the press, and et cetera. And, once we found that mojo to be able to flip the script as far as the personnel, you could see his talents. This guy in San Diego did wonders. I mean, if they don't play the Yankees, which, is one of the best teams I saw while I was general manager, won 114 games in 98. They probably won the World Series in 98. Maybe Bosch isn't available to us when he was. And, the irony is looking back at that time, there really weren't any real super teams, let's say. There could be some big records, but I guess teams weren't as deep, although that Yankee team was deep. The Seattle team in 01 that won 116 games was extremely deep, with a great manager, Lou Piniella, one of my mentors and a good friend. So the timing with Boch coming and him really wanting to be in San Francisco made it an easy fit. And now what also helped is that we lived in the same building across the street. The wives got very close. And we spent, I don't know how many hours before and after games, as fate would have it. In some ways, that yin and yang, I think, really gave us an advantage. It showed ownership that we were in lockstep. It showed the players that there was no division between people in uniform and the manager in the front office, which goes, a long way, because in a lot of organizations, you don't have that same cohesion, put it that way.
I'm glad it worked out. Being able to go to the games, thankful for you. I mean, going with Scott, Sean, Colin, 2010, 12, 14, sitting behind the home plate. I mean, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to go to those games. Your sons took care of me, and that was honestly the best times of my life, screaming, watching Scott pour beer down his pants after the Ichikawa home run, time after time. But my last question for you to end the night, 2010, 12, 14, was there a moment in any of those years, besides spring training, where you're like, holy shit, like these guys have it? And the second part of this question is, in 2014 was probably my favorite team with Ichikawa. Was crazy. There's a shot of you crying in your press box. I'm so curious what was going on in your mind and the reason why you were crying. Because honestly, I was emotional. I don't know why I was crying, but I had tears in my eyes, and watching you cry made me cry, to be honest.
Well, two interesting questions. The first one, I guess there were telltale signs in each year. Let's start with 10. Game 6 in Philly was a must. And we became so empowered by winning Game 6 and knocking them out of the way. It was almost like in 10 when we were able to defeat the Braves. And I mention that because you don't want to play Game 7 in Philadelphia. So once we beat them and we were pitching the way we were pitching, I thought we had a great chance to neutralize Texas, which ended up happening. In 12, ironically, which was an interesting year because we had to survive Cincinnati. We had to survive St. Louis. Game 1, Verlander. Pablo with the 3 home runs. I mean, that was a shot across the bow. Now, they were a juggernaut offensively, but I say this with all fondness to the organization and the manager, and I know that Jimmy Leland real well. They had a hard time playing baseball. And they also had that layoff that kind of put us in that fortuitous position. 14, the interesting thing about 14 is that there are a lot of things going on behind the scenes that a lot of people aren't privy to. And really, the story of Bumgarner, which I'll go to the punchline first. When Bum came in that game, everybody that I was around or in my mind, this is over. Because the story goes, and I was in a luxury suite. The story goes, it was palpable on the field. Because I don't know that Kansas City knew he was warming up. I don't remember the configuration of the bullpen or whether they could see him. But when he ran out, They took note. And once he came in the game, I knew we'd figure out a way to win that game. And plus, going back to the Anaheim series, I thought the baseball gods would be in our favor after, not winning a Game 7 in Anaheim, which I'm still not over, although I'm more PO'd about Game 6. And then, to answer the last question, that whole year was incredibly emotional. So starting with what was about to transpire in the field is I'm sitting in the box and I notice the half inning before Ishikawa hits the walk-off home run, he's still in left field. Now, if you would have told me he would have played left field in any playoff game, let alone in the NLCS, I would have thought you were crazy. But I immediately got it. I said, but you know what? Bochy's got a thing here. He might come up. And all right, it's worth the risk. Now, when he hit the home run, what was running through my mind was about him specifically, because this kid is an amazing person and God-fearing man, and almost walked away from the game. And I'm saying, there's something going on here. Why is this happening to us? And somebody's reached down and really touched this kid, and we're all benefiting from it. But the emotion I had going into that game was really personal, in that one of my close friends from college and a longtime scout with the Yankee organization in San Francisco was advancing Kansas City, and they were playing in Baltimore. And the team of scouts, there was 4 of them, was supposed to leave Baltimore on a morning flight to fly back to Kansas City. Well, Stan Selesky didn't meet these folks in the lobby, and they flew without him to Kansas City. And one of them was able to call back. And make a long story short, manager had to go to the room to see what was going on, and he had committed suicide. And it crushed me. And this was during our series against St. Louis. And nobody that I know, including myself personally, and I wasn't working with them day to day like they were on these scouting assignments, nobody saw this coming. And it's still very tough for me to rationalize. So it was an outpouring of emotion on a personal level and on a professional level. And I think it just shows, how great and fallible life is. It's an amazing, amazing journey. That's the one thing I don't think people understand about baseball. It's an SOB because you got to do it every day. And, maybe only the stock market on a daily basis has as much gravity as trying to deal with the ups and downs of the wins and the losses and where your team's at personally and collectively, over 162 games. And it's longer than that because you're talking about spring training too. It's incredibly grueling. It takes a toll mentally and physically, and a lot of people aren't cut out for it. That's why I have a kind of a hard time. I'm not saying necessarily grew up in the sport, but if you don't have a grasp of what the sport is about at the gut level, I don't see how somebody else, even with a great resume, could come from another sport and get into a high-ranking baseball position. Could he become a team president? Probably. And that's probably been done. But it takes special people. And there are a lot of skills therein that whatever job that you're at in any organization, it's very expert specific. And, that's what people thrive on, trying to get expert information to make the best decisions. So that long-winded, great question, but long-winded answer, obviously.
Thank you for the memories and the beers and the parades. I've had a blast at all 3. So cheers to you, my friend.
Thanks, guys.
Well, yeah, before we
need to do one of these live at Momo's.
That's
Hey,
there he is.
Hey.
That's the goal. Well, before we let Tito take us off here, we were talking about our beloved San Francisco 49ers, Dad, before you jumped on. And I want you to please explain to these fellas and our listeners how the hell a man from Concord, New Hampshire grows and becomes a diehard New York Giants fan, one of our biggest rivals. You gotta break this down for us because it doesn't make any damn sense.
It makes no sense.
Well, no, it's very easily explained. When I grew up, the only broadcast that you could get in New England, including Boston, and I lived north of Boston, was the Giants game. It was New York up, and then of course below New York, being starting in Jersey, you had the Philadelphia Eagles. And the irony, at that time, the AFL was in existence, but the Boston Patriots were a kind of a nondescript team playing in Fenway Park, not drawing, very few names of note. And if you remember really the history of that league, it was very West Coast centric, and most teams, had the firepower and the best talent were from the West Coast. So obviously then grew up a Patriots fan, and the team that got streamed every weekend that we had a chance to watch a game was the Giants. And back then, while they were on the tail end of having won some world championships, they were competitive, but certainly not what they became. And now they're in a rebuild, which I haven't followed as closely the last couple of years for a lot of different reasons, including COVID.
Fair enough.
Well, we'll take you on the Niners bandwagon any time. I can tell you right now, the Giants have a little bit of time to go.
No, we do. Well, the 49ers went through it, my friend, too.
Absolutely. You're right.
We don't want to talk about that.
Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. I know all three of us appreciate it very much. To piggyback on what Craig said, you've helped create some amazing memories for all of us. And I know that aside from the baseball and the World Series championships and the fun and parades going down Market Street, you've been very good to the three of us individually. And we thank you. We thank you for everything, and can't tell you how much we appreciate you dedicating some time this evening talking to us.
One last story, and it's relative to the fans or the first parade. As we would get staged on California Street, Bill Newcomb, who was the managing general partner at the time, came over to the car that I was going to be riding, and he says, "Look," he says, "I'm warning you, you don't understand how big this is." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "The crowd." I said, "Okay." He said, "You really can't see it from here, but when you turn down Montgomery," and that was the route, you had to go from California to Montgomery and then turn right on Market, to get the flavor of the volume of the crowd and the outpouring emotion. And I'll never forget that, even though he told me, I wasn't ready for it. And when we turned left on Market, I literally gasped. I said, "Holy crap." Now, the other interesting thing was, and I think Sean was up, in the seating area where the podium was for the speakers in front of City Hall, that the sea of people was it was maddening. And that not only happened that year, but the three parades. And I guess what you go through is that you realized from a true San Francisco fan's perspective, or the generational passion of the fans, what it meant to people. I mean, this was a friggin' happening. This was closure. This was about San Francisco and Northern California, and Giants fans near and far. It took everybody's breath away, and it blew the players away. they never forgot that. And that's one of my lasting memories, because I'm sure you guys, had your happy moments and your sad moments for a lot of different reasons, because of all the people that you shared it with, but all the people you couldn't share it with. And just very fortunate we were able to pull the first one off, and then that became the foundation for the next two.
Wow.
Amen.
What a fun way to end it. Thank you so much, Brian, again, for joining us. Appreciate it so much. This has been the Home Plate Podcast. Safe to say, I think it was my most favorite episode we've done so far. We'll see you guys very soon. Take care and be well.
See you, fellas.
Love you, big man.
All right, man.
Thanks, Brian.